Welcome back to this read-along book club of Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. Today we are talking about Chapter 2, Integration, of course. Where do we leave the biologist? Well, she has been infected, we think, by some spores. She is no longer affected by the psychologist's hypnosis. Reality is revealing itself to us. And even though it is, it isn't. So there's a lot of questions still asked in the second chapter, a lot more complications. Things seem to be falling apart for everybody. What I really love about this chapter is we get a deeper look at the psychology of the biologist. So let us begin. In the morning, I woke with my senses heightened, but so that even the rough brown bark of the pine or the ordinary lunging swoop of the woodpecker came to me as a kind of minor revelation. Is this the clear-mindedness of the infection or something else? Is it just a good night's sleep? But my reverie was soon tempered by disastrous news. The anthropologist was gone, her tent empty of her personal effects. Worse, in my view, the psychologist seemed shaken. So we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. The anthropologist is gone. The psychologist is quite upset. And we learn later in the chapter why the psychologist is upset. And it has to do more than with the fact that the anthropologist is missing right now. And the psychologist says, what she saw in that structure unnerved her to the point that she did not want to continue with this expedition. She started back to the border to await extraction. Really? I don't think so, psychologist, but let us move on here. So we should continue with our plan, the psychologist said. We should continue to investigate the tower. The word tower in this context felt like a blatant plea for my loyalty because, as we know, everybody else is calling it a tunnel. The biologist is only calling it a tower, which I think outside of the lighthouse connection, we don't really know why she's referring to it by that name. But at the tower, the situation changed yet again. So the psychologist is standing there saying, I'll stand guard here. And she says, against what? I asked, incredulous, because so far we know there has been no danger outside of potential danger with this creepy howling beast on the wind. And then the psychologist says, there's no reward in the risk. Emphasis on reward in the risk, which is a hypnotic cue, we find out, because the surveyor's grip on her rifle loosened. The features on her face became somehow indistinct for a moment. And so we descended, as before, under the psychologist's watchful eye. The first thing I noticed on the staging level before we reached the wider staircase, the spiral down, before we encountered again the words written on the wall, the tower was breathing. The tower breathed. And the walls, when I went to touch them, carried the echo of a heartbeat. And they were not made of stone, but of living tissue. Remember last time when she was exiting after infection or after breathing in the spores? Should I stop calling it infection? I don't know. Maybe it is. But she she saw that it felt like anyway, exiting the gullet of a great beast. And in fact, she is finally seeing it for what it truly is. And so she grabs the surveyor's hand, forcing her palm against the wall, asking her, do you see this? Do you feel this? And of course she doesn't. So she realizes that, yes, the surveyor is still hypnotized. But my lodestone, the place I always thought of when people asked me why I became a biologist, was the overgrown swimming pool in the backyard of the rented house where I grew up. I really love this story because it's such a calm and peaceful and somewhat unnerving and discomforting image of her past, right? She's this young girl. She seems to be detached from her parents somewhat, and so they just let her sit here and observe this ecosystem as it grows, even though they try to encourage her to have friends, and she doesn't have any. And within months of our arrival, the pool had become a functioning ecosystem, but I could easily lose myself in the micro world of the pool. So she's being almost hypnotized by this pool. This is really, to me, the pool is a proxy for Area X, where she is now. Really, she's looking back at this, at the very end of this section, I think the scene, she notes that she hasn't felt this kind of connection like that since the pool. And so this is a very special place. So I know on our Discord server, if you're not on our Discord server, you should totally join because we've been having a conversation, a debate perhaps, about the mental state of the psychologist, what is real, what is not real, because of the hypnosis, because of the odd goings on, the odd features of Area X and how it just seems to warp reality and change it. But this to me is such a great cue as to the biologist's mental state. And we get even more of that when we start to talk about her husband. But let's move on. We're not quite there yet. But our luck ran out and we couldn't afford the rent anymore. We moved to a tiny apartment. So unfortunately, she had to abandon her pool. And one of the greatest traumas of my life was worrying about the pool. Will the new owners see the beauty and the importance of leaving it as is? Or would they destroy it, create unthinking slaughter in honor of the pool's real function? Is that a metaphor for what we do to the earth? I'm not quite sure, but we do know that Jeff Vandermeer is very, very active in environmentalism. He's very worried about what we're doing to the world, and I can see part of him in the biologist because I don't know the guy. Maybe he's an isolated guy. Maybe he's an introverted guy, but he seems to care so much about the environment. And to me, you can see the biologist here caring so much about this pool, whereas a lot of people would view it as, oh man, we need to return this pool to its real function, right? For relaxation, for entertainment, not to house this crazy ecosystem. But she just views the world differently. There are certain kinds of deaths that one should not be expected to relive. Certain kinds of connections so deep that when they are broken, you feel the snap of the link inside you. As we descended into that tower, I felt it again, for the first time in a long time, the flush of discovery I'd experienced as a child, but I also kept waiting for the swamp. You see how it's a proxy? It's a connection. So not only is this tower connecting her to her childhood, to this very pivotal moment when she had this pool and when she was able to observe this ecosystem, it is connecting her to other things. Her husband even, which we're going to get to very shortly. But I think you can at least appreciate what he's doing here. Vandermeer is giving us an emotional attachment. Well, the biologist is having an emotional attachment to this place, despite how alien it is, despite how dangerous it is, despite the fact that she's no longer hypnotized. She is still drawn to it, and she must go on. And where lies the strangling fruit that came from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms that ... And the tower kept revealing themselves. They occurred always at roughly the same level against the left-hand side of the wall. Why is that? We never really know, not quite yet anyway. To share with the worms that gather in the darkness and surround the world with the power of their lives, while from the dim-lit halls of other places forms that never could be writhed for the impatience of the few who have never seen or been seen. So this sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. It sounds like a bunch of... who knows what? It's very Lovecraftian. It's very old script. It's very biblical in a way. But that with a variation of about 3 inches above the current words and 3 inches below, there existed a ghosting of prior words. Interesting. Written in the same cursive script. So there's an echo. Do you recognize this? I asked the surveyor, pointing to a kind of interlocking lattice work that at first I hadn't even realized was a pattern, but that covered the wall from just below the phantom scripts to just above them. The main strand roughly in the middle. It vaguely resembled scorpions strung end to end or rising, only to be subsumed again. Bizarre, right? That's one thing I love about this book, is it's very bizarre. But much to my relief, she could see it. No, I don't recognize it, she said, but I'm not an expert. I like that because none of them really are experts in this regard, regardless of their background, right? They're in a very alien place. And why should I rest when wickedness exists in the world? God's love shines on anyone who understands the limits of endurance and allows forgiveness, chosen for the service of a higher power. Sounds like a sermon, doesn't it? In the black water with the sun shining at midnight, those fruits shall come ripe, and in the darkness of that which is golden shall split open to reveal the revelation of the fatal softness in the earth. What is he talking about? What is it talking about? Sometimes you get a sense of when the truth of things will not be revealed by microscopes. I love that line because we trust these people as scientists, right? They're all there. They're experts, even though the surveyor said she's not an expert in the writing, of course, because they need the linguist. Even the biologist, a woman of science, admits that sometimes you cannot find the truth with investigation, with science. Sometimes you have to feel it. And that's such an ironic but beautiful statement by a scientist, by someone like the biologist. Do you think the words on the wall are becoming fresher? Fresher? More recent. New writing. I stared at her for a moment. Standing there in that impossible place, I said it before the surveyor could. To own it. Something below us may still be in the process of writing the script, and it made the overgrown pool of my youth seem simplistic, one-dimensional. So she has entered another world that is not just representative of the pool, but goes beyond the pool. It is so much more complex. Why did you say something rather than someone? Why can't it be someone? I just shrugged. Because the biologist feels it, right? Because the truth cannot be revealed with microscopes alone. They find something on the floor. For a long time now, the steps have been covered in a kind of strange residue. And the residue sparkled with a kind of subdued golden shimmer shot through with flakes red like dried blood. The overall impression was of something sliding down the stairs. Sliding perhaps, or dragged. The marks she had pointed to were oval, and about a foot long by half-foot wide. 6 of them were splayed over the steps in 2 rows. A flurry of indentations inside these shapes resembled the marks left by cilia. What the hell is walking down here? I trained a light on it and saw a suggestion of a boot print in the residue. A boot print? Well, that sounds familiar. You're right, I said. That's another person down here not long ago. And now we are going back in time again. The 11th expedition in particular had been difficult, and personally difficult for me with regard to a fact about which I have not been entirely honest thus far. This is a great thing with first-person narration, is that a lot of people, some people on the Discord server, think that everything that is coming out in the prose is real. It's true, it's factual, it's black and white. That's what first person point of view doesn't do, or doesn't have to do. It can do that. If it does that, it's quite boring. So here, I'm not saying this is an unreliable narrator situation, but she is a little bit unsure of what she should tell us, because as we find out, like I said, she's documenting this. So she's having a conversation with us, and now she is finally feeling the need to become more truthful. Or is she? So my husband was on the 11th expedition as a medic. So now, more trauma, not just the trauma of the poor pool, linking it with Area X, linking it with the tower, her husband. I have hoped that in reading this account, you might find me a credible, objective witness. Here we go. Here's Vandermeer cluing us in again. She is hoping that we believe her. But that's the thing. Do we believe her? She's a fictitious character. But that's the thing about first person, again, is that you can't... Not everything you read is exactly what's happening. And I personally love it. Some people don't like it. Some people want whatever they read to be exactly what it's going to be. To me, that's just the beauty of fiction and unreliable narrators, or reliable ones. Who knows? To me, it just really adds to the mystery of this entire story, the whole world. But how could I not be affected by Area X if only through him? Only through him, because she had sex with him. She's starting to question everything. Like, what's wrong with her? Did something happen before she went there? And we're going to get into it. I found my husband next to the refrigerator, still dressed in his expedition clothes, drinking milk until it flowed down his chin and neck, eating leftovers furiously. There was an odd calm about him. Where did we notice this odd calm? It was with the people, the documents, the footage, I believe, or the photos as well, of the people that returned home. Same thing. Gone from him, too, seemed to be any memory of how our marriage had begun to disintegrate well before our arguments over the leaving for Area X. So, more trauma, right? We're on shaky ground before anything really begins. And to me, this is such a great exploration of relationships. I really love what Vandermeer did here, because it's a science fiction novel. It's kind of a horror novel, too. So many people reading this, I feel like, are just only interested in what they're going to discover, what does the story mean, but he goes deeper with character here, and he's making a lot of commentary on about opposites and what relationships are like, and how they can completely fall apart, like how everything else can fall apart in the story. There's so many parallels. I hope you're paying attention. Well, I guess that's what I'm here for, to try to make you pay more attention. I was trying to reclaim remnants of the man I remembered. Remnant, she's constantly reminded, she's constantly referring to him as someone else, a memory. She's trying to pull the real him out of this person that showed up at her house. But I could find none of that in him now. When they came for him the next evening, we learned she calls the number, and that's why they show up. But he's been diagnosed with inoperable systemic cancer, and he died 6 months later. The other members of the expedition, all of them who died of cancer as well, so there's a commonality. Whatever had happened in Area X, he had not come back. Not really. So he's physically there, not mentally there, and we get a far deeper dive into this a little bit later into this chapter. And now we're back in the tower, in the tunnel, and they're considering, like, maybe we should get the hell out of here. This is getting kind of weird. And then she says, just around the next corner, just a little farther, and then we'll go back. It was a test of a fragile trust. It was a test of our curiosity and fascination, which walk side by side with our fear. Prometheus comes to mind, the film Prometheus. There is a biologist. If you haven't seen it, they find this alien ruin. It's very similar to this. They find these alien ruins. They go in there, they see this weird snake thing, and the biologist talks to it like it's a cute little puppy or something. And this is what I'm talking about. So everybody made fun of that. Like, no biologist would do that. Nobody would do that. And I always talk about like people like Steve Irwin, right? There are people out there who are so fascinated, so intrigued, so drawn to these things that their sense of caution goes out the window. I think that's one thing people need to understand, is that often people do things that are reckless because of this fascination. We know the biologist is absolutely fascinated with this kind of stuff. Go back to the pool. Even in the pool, even though that's normal, she found a sense of calm there, of safety there, and she's finding that same thing here. But again, it's walking side by side with our fear. So she admits that fear as well. She even admits in a way that, you know, they're doing this together. Again, it's a test of our fragile trust. But if you ever doubt or question someone's motivation to do something, these are the lines that need to be present in the fiction. And they're often not, because, you know, you'll watch a movie or read a book sometimes and be like, oh, no one would ever do that. Vandermeer is telling you right now what is going through her mind and how she is justifying it. So there's something down there, she whispered in my ear. Something like a body or a person. No, slumped down by the side of the wall. I only caught a glimpse. Her breathing came quick and shallow against her mask. This has to do with the other boot print. Does she think it's her husband? Because remember, we find out that her husband came back, but did he really come back? Is she questioning that? Is she thinking that she is going to find him down here perhaps? Is it just her hopefulness? Because again, we also experience a little bit later how irrationally people act when they are missing someone. Everything goes out the window, emotions take over. It was the body of the anthropologist slumped against the left-hand wall where all the writing is, remember? Her hands in her lap, her head down as if in prayer. Prayer, interesting, because a lot of this sounds biblical. It sounds like a sermon, something green spilling out from her mouth. And gently I knelt beside the anthropologist. There wasn't much left of her face, and odd burn marks were all that remained of her skin, spilling out from her broken jaw, which looked as though someone had wrenched it open in a single act of brutality, was a torrent of green ash that sat on her chest in a mound. Her hands, palms up in her lap, had no skin left on them, only a kind of gauzy filament and more burn marks. Her legs seemed fused together and half melted, one boot missing and one flung against the wall. Well, I guess that's the answer of the missing boot, or the boot print. The shadows of the abyss are like the petals of a monstrous flower that shall blossom within the skull and expand the mind beyond what any man can hear. I think she interrupted the creator of the script on the wall, I said. And first of all, the thing, as she calls it, and no matter what the surveyor might hope, I could not think of it as human, had clearly turned in a frenzy. Instead of the smooth sliding tracks, the slime residue formed a kind of clockwise swirl, the marks of the feet, in quotes, as I thought of them, elongated and narrowed by the sudden change. Okay, things are getting Lovecraftian, if I had to say. But she had hoped to take a sample, the anthropologist. But how insane or oblivious, such a risk, and the anthropologist had never struck me as impulsive or brave. So she's questioning the motivation again. But we know that she was hypnotized. We know about what the psychologist is up to. But I found two sets of boot prints facing each other. One set belonged to the anthropologist. The other was neither mine nor the surveyor's. Ooh, whose is it? In the middle of the night, the psychologist had awoken the anthropologist, put her under hypnosis, and together they had come to the tower and climbed down this far. At this point, the psychologist had given the anthropologist an order under hypnosis, one that she probably knew was suicidal. So this is when she's figuring it out. This isn't verified. This is what she's just going through in her mind. And here she is talking about hypnosis to the surveyor, and she questions that. What are you talking about? Hypnotism? Because somehow I've become impervious to it. She hypnotized you before we came down here today to make sure you would do your duty. I saw her do it. And you did nothing? If this is even true, I didn't want the psychologist to know that she couldn't hypnotize me, and I had wanted to come down here. Wanted being emphasized. So she has this impulse, this drive to continue down regardless of the danger, regardless of what they're going to find. This is when she's going back, recalling what they had done before they had gotten here. And she focuses on the map. So the map had been the first form of misdirection. She's trying to figure out just exactly how she was deceived, how she was misguided, almost always in the context of the lighthouse, not the base camp. So we find out that there's a lighthouse. It's very important. Who is running this expedition? It's a psychologist. So could the lighthouse be important to her? Why this stretch of coast? What might lie inside the lighthouse? Why was the camp set back into the forest far from the lighthouse, but fairly close to the tower, which of course did not exist on the map, and that it might also have been the epicenter of whatever had spread out to become Area X. This is when she is figuring out, like, maybe right here, this thing that's not on the map, this tower, this tunnel, this strange structure, is sort of the epicenter of this whole thing. They took away our names in the second month, stripped them from us. So they are taking all agency away from them. They're taking everything, even their names. So all they are is titles. I don't believe this is just a game that they're playing in the context of the requirements of this expedition, meaning it's safer to have nobody know each other personally, to have no connection to humanity. But I believe it's a mental game that is trying to just completely destroy their psyches to make them puppets. By the time we were ready to cross the border, we knew everything and we knew nothing. So they were trained, they were given information, they were studying the maps, they were given all this stuff. And now she's finally coming to the realization that actually they knew absolutely nothing. Everything has changed now. The psychologist wasn't there when we emerged. So yeah, she's gone too. Things are really falling apart. Finally, I could not deny the truth. She's gone, I said. What should we do now? We examine the samples I took, we develop the photographs, and we go through them. Then tomorrow we probably go back down into the tower. The surveyor gave a harsh laugh as she struggled to find words. She's like, I'm not going back there, are you crazy? And it's a tunnel, not a tower. So even in this fit of somewhat rage, she corrects her on that. I'm not ready to go back, I told her. Not yet. I wasn't near ready, despite what had happened. You prefer this place. You really do, don't you? She's saying it out loud. She is stuck here. She no longer fears this. She feels like she is part of this entire environment. Now she starts to look at the samples, and they told a series of cryptic jokes with punchlines I didn't understand. Those cells were doing a magnificent job of mimicking certain species of let me try this. Saprotrophic organisms, which I believe I looked it up and they were something like they feed off of dead tissue. For whatever reason, my Kindle dictionary is not working right here. But I was causing a reaction in the sample. So she believes that she's infected and she's causing all of these samples to kind of disintegrate, to be unreliable. And then there was the sample from the anthropologist file. I left it for last for the obvious reasons. I had the surveyor take a section, put it on the slide, and write down what you saw through the microscope. Why? She asked. Why did you need me to do this? Hypothetically, there could be contamination. And she really doesn't have a good reason for this. She squinted through the microscope at the sample from whatever had killed the anthropologist. It was brain tissue. Strange. The cells were remarkably human with some irregularities. Was it really human? Or was it pretending to be human, which is a great segue into, we're talking about her husband very shortly. Every photograph of the words on the wall was a riot of luminous, out-of-focus color. Every photograph of anything other than the words had come out as pure darkness. The surveyor snorted. Not a damn thing. Nothing. Except they all seemed fixated on the lighthouse, watching the lighthouse, going to the lighthouse, living in the goddamn lighthouse. I'll tell you one thing we're not doing tomorrow. We're not going back into that tunnel. Tower, the biologist corrects her. She glares at her. At dusk, the familiar moaning came to us from across the salt marsh flats as we ate our dinner around the campfire. In the camp, making the tents into triangles of shadow, even the darkness seemed more alive to me, surrounding me like something physical. I can't even say it was a sinister presence. Emphasizing again that she feels at home, she feels safe here, despite its alien nature. I felt in that moment as if we were all a dream. The training, my former life, the world I had left behind, none of that mattered anymore. She is integrating, one might say. Then through the darkness I saw it, a flicker of orange light, just a touch of illumination too far up in the sky. This puzzled me until I realized it must originate with the lighthouse. Something's in the lighthouse. Now we are back in time, exploring her relationship with her husband even further. There had been a storm that final full day alone with my husband after we returned from the 11th expedition. In those last weeks before the expedition, we had argued violently. If you go, I told him, you might not come back and you can't be sure I'll be waiting for you if you do, which had made him laugh infuriatingly and say, oh, have you been waiting for me all this time? Have I arrived yet? What a weird thing to say. Our relationship had been thready for a while, in part because he was gregarious and I preferred solitude. This is when we're talking about the contrast and how they believe it's a strength between both of them. In fact, it was just what drove them apart in the very end. During one of our fights, he admitted as much, tried to make his volunteering, in quotes, for the expedition a sign of how much I had pushed him away. So he's weaponizing it, basically. Early in our relationship, I had told my husband about the swimming pool as we lay in bed. I would have sailed boats on it. Captained by old Flopper, no doubt, I replied, and everything would have been happy and wonderful. No, because I would have found you surly and willful and grim, fairly grim. I would have found you frivolous and wished really hard for the turtles to scuttle your boat. If they did, I would just have it rebuilt even better and told everyone about the grim kid who talked to frogs. So what has changed if we wouldn't have liked each other as kids? Oh, I would have liked you despite that, he said, grinning. You would have fascinated me, and I would have followed you anywhere without hesitation. Interesting thing to say in this present circumstance, well, I guess past. So we fit back then in our old way. We clicked by being opposites and took pride in the idea that this made us strong. We reveled in this construct so much for so long that it was a wave that did not break until after we were married. Right? Some of us know how that might be. And then it destroyed us over time in depressingly familiar ways. But none of this, the good or the bad, mattered when he returned from the expedition. I love this passage because it's so common. Often we have a relationship with someone who we probably don't think is quite right for us, but we hold on to something. So in the case of the biologist and her husband, it's their differences. She's introverted, he's extroverted, and they use that as a power. But what happened? So right when they got married, it's really what destroyed them over time. So they had been lying to themselves, believing the lie. And right here, but none of this, the good or the bad, mattered when he returned from the expedition, because as often, when things like this happen, our emotions take over, right? We're not thinking straight. All we are concerned about is this person that was missing, that we truly loved, is back. And how can we fix it? How can we make everything better? I've been asked questions from the night before, like whether the journey back had been tough. No, he said, effortless, flashing an imitation of his old infuriating smile. Perfect word there, right? How long did it take? I asked. No time at all. I couldn't read his expression, but in its blankness I sensed something mournful, something left inside that wanted to communicate but couldn't. I love that, because that's her husband. It almost seems like her husband is trapped inside this shell, trying to communicate, can't do it. And so she's faced with this imitation, this automaton, as she calls it. And your work? I asked. Oh, he said, as if he'd only been away for a few weeks, as if I were a colleague, not his lover, his wife. Oh, the same as always, nothing really new. I couldn't fool myself any longer that my husband was entirely present. So she is repeating over and over and over to us that this is this is not her husband. I went outside and eventually found him around the side of the house. He was standing in front of the boat he had bought a few years back. As I came, I curled my arm around his. He had a puzzled, almost forlorn look on his face, as if he could remember that the boat was important to him, but not why. See, again, I love this. It's like that there's some recollection in this shell of a man. So we just stood there, and although I could feel the heat and weight of him beside me, right, the humanity, the steady sound of his breathing, we were living apart. He didn't try to look back over his shoulder at the boat when she pulls him in. And I think that's when I made my decision, if he had only looked back, because that would show that he was a real person, that he was him. At dinner, as he was finishing, they came for him in 4 or 5 unmarked cars and surveillance van. They approached him with respect, one might almost say fear, the kind of watchful gentleness you might display if about to handle an unexploded bomb. That's why I called the special number. He had left for emergencies. I didn't know what to do with him, couldn't coexist with him any longer in this altered state. This is such a great line when he's in the facility. I am walking forever on the path from the border to the base camp. It is taking a long time, and I know it will take even longer to get back. There is no one with me. I am all by myself. The trees are not the trees, and the birds are not the birds, and I am not me, but just something that has been walking for a very long time. That is saying so much about what this whole story is about. I kept thinking about Area X and how I would never know what it was like without going there. I think they accepted me as an experiment, key word. So After this, she's like, I have to know. It's almost like there's a movie, a French movie. What's it called? The Vanishing. And it's all about this couple, and this woman goes missing, and this guy racks his brain for years and years to find out whatever happened to her. He finally finds her killer, and he makes a terrible agreement with this killer because of his curiosity, right? He had to know what happened to her. And let's just say it doesn't end well for him. Just like what she's doing here, right? Curiosity killed the cat. Curiosity killed the biologist. The brightness infecting my senses had spread to my chest. I can describe it in no other way. Internally, there was a brightness in me, a kind of prickling energy and anticipation that pushed hard against my lack of sleep. But now I also knew that someone had been in the lighthouse the night before, if the psychologist had sought refuge there, and I could track her down. So tower, lighthouse, she decided on the lighthouse. And we also learn here from the surveyor that they have told them that there is a weapons cache in the lighthouse. Will there be? We'll see. And this is when the biologist actually tries to use the hypnosis on her. There's no reward in the risk, emphasized, of going back to the tower right now. And she finds out the psychologist hypnotic cues, but a shudder passed over the surveyor's face, a kind of temporary disorientation, but it did not work. So she knows that the psychologist is the only one who has the hypnotic power. This damn rifle. I stripped it down and cleaned and found it was made of 30-year-old parts cobbled together. Nothing we brought with us is from the present. So they're giving them all of this old crap. Why? We don't really know. Is it a game? Is it a joke? Is it an experiment that they think they can only have old stuff here? And finally, they part ways. I looked back a couple of times before the trail twisted away, and the surveyor was still sitting there, staring at me like a distorted reflection of who I'd been just days before. I looked back a couple of times. What didn't her husband do at the boat? He did not look back. Interesting little thing to note. And next up is immolation, which is going to be a very key word in the entire theme of this story. So tell me, what did you think? Did this chapter frustrate you? Did it illuminate some things? Are there some things that I didn't cover that you'd like to talk about? Please let me know in the comments. Also, feel free to join the Discord if you're not already there. We are having quite the discussion about Annihilation this early on. So I will see you very soon with chapter 3 titled Immolation. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.